I remember feeling that there are very few times in your life when you feel the hair on the back of your neck rise up. I don't know whether that's literally what happened, but it was certainly the sense that I had met something unholy. Unholy.
What's going on, fam? We're back with a creepy one. The man you just met is Eric Weinstein. Eric is a mathematician, cultural commentator, has a podcast called The Portal, which is where I pulled these clips from. He has studied at University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. So the dude knows his shit. He's smart as fuck and knows people who knows people who knows people who kills people. I was looking into this monster, which was kind of how I came across Eric Weinstein. This monster was arrested, put into prison, and while he was in prison, he was put in protective custody because of who he was. And then this happened.
Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein.
That's right. The monster known as Jeffrey Epstein is dead. How? How the fuck did that happen? Offed himself? Really? Come on.
Let me ask you this right off the bat. Well, I don't know what I'm going to ask you. He didn't kill himself, right?
I don't believe so.
Thank you.
No. You know me, I'm not a conspiracy guy, right? I don't disappear down rabbit holes very often, but no, I don't think there's any way in hell he killed himself.
Michael Shermer, who's the head of Skeptics magazine, who doesn't believe anything, found out that the tapes were missing and that the cameras didn't work and that the tapes were accidentally deleted from the first time he attempted suicide. And Shermer's like, oh, this is a conspiracy.
There's just there's no way I could be convinced that he offed himself.
No way.
So
he knew too much.
Yeah. But we're not here to discuss the weird shit surrounding Epstein's death. Nope. We are here to figure out who this fucking dude was. What would it be like to meet Jeffrey Epstein, a billionaire, playboy, freak who gets young women, takes them to crazy places, and does weird, illegal things? Yeah, the dude's an absolute monster who had his own fucking island to do all this gnarly shit. And the political, the celebrities, the masters of the universe, yeah, they all protected this fucking guy, and probably because they were in on it. What would it be like to meet this fucking monster? I found this, and boy, did I get more than I bargained for. Check this gnarly shit out.
Here's what went into my meeting of Jeffrey Epstein. My recollection is that Jeffrey Epstein had a staff of young adult women who I would guess were in their late 20s, perhaps early 30s. They seemed very professional. They seemed very attractive, and that they seemed to take his schedule and all of the sort of incidental executive function duties off of his hands. Principally, I dealt with them, according to my recollection, and not with Jeffrey directly. When I got to the door, it was an extraordinary experience. He, in fact, was living in what was, for Manhattan, which is famous for relatively small dwellings, even for the very rich, in a very large townhouse. I went through the door, I was greeted, was treated professionally, and I was led to a waiting room. In that waiting room, which I believe was off to the left as you entered, I sat in the chair for a while, and I noticed that there was a large mechanical piece of art. And I believe that it had some electronics to it. After a while of sitting in my chair, my recollection is that I went up to this art object and I started trying to inspect it. As I was looking at the art object, which I thought was quite innocent, I suddenly thought that I saw something like a lipstick camera. That is a very small camera whose lens was staring straight at me. My first thought was, holy cow, I've discovered that there's a hidden camera that has been trained on me while I've been in this room. I thought myself to be rather clever for having found it. But my second thought was exactly the reverse of this. I bet this isn't that difficult to find. The object that it was buried in attracts attention, and it must be that people who look at this object invariably find the camera. And then I started asking myself, Am I supposed to find the camera? Is this a test? Is this person trying to make sure I'm comfortable with being under surveillance? The whole thing was now quite queer, and I went back and I sat down as I recall it. Shortly thereafter, almost responsive to finding the camera, my recollection is that I was called out of this room and I was led to the back where I was to wait for Jeffrey Epstein in a very large room with an enormous dining table. Now, what was most memorable about this dining table was that it had a tablecloth that I thought to be incredibly inappropriate. What I recall is that it had the appearance of a draped coffin, because the tablecloth was an extremely large American flag. If I recall correctly, there was another gentleman, perhaps another hedge fund person or a science person, who sat to my left. And I stared at this tablecloth and I thought, oh, you're going to serve me food on a tablecloth made out of the flag of my country? Or perhaps you're going to give me a beverage that might spill on the American flag? Is this a test of some kind of my loyalty to my country, or whether I have some sort of morality that isn't burdened by some petty reverence to an inanimate object? I couldn't tell what was going on, but I started getting extremely agitated and in fact angry. And I think my feelings involved an expletive, which is F the person who decided that this was a good idea to put an American flag as a tablecloth to test new people coming to the house. My recollection is that Jeffrey entered from the right with a young woman. In my mind, I remember her as being perhaps 22, 23. She was extremely attractive. As I recall, Jeffrey sat down and began bouncing this woman on his knee. So he motioned for her to sit down, and she appeared to be quite happy in this role as Jeffrey asked questions and discussed science, theories I had about markets, how they related to gauge theory, theoretical physics. I don't remember the man saying much to me who was also in the room at the time. And so all I have a recollection of is the four of us, Jeffrey, the woman on his leg, and the other gentleman and myself. My recollection is also that in order to test our willpower and concentration, that Jeffrey would bounce this woman occasionally, that she would giggle, in order to test our resolve as to whether we could stay focused in the conversation. I found him to be quite intelligent. He clearly was no slouch, but I also found that every single interaction with him resulted in my being back-footed conversationally. He was constantly trying to throw me off guard. And at some level, I was also irritated and angered. I was trying to keep my cool during this entire interaction. And I thought to myself, I don't know anybody who behaves this way. I knew several rich people at that point in my life, and I've known many more very wealthy people, perhaps billionaires of 10 and 11 figure fortunes. To the best of my recollection, I've never met a single other person who behaved in such a strange way. He didn't appear to be really that focused on markets and trading, and he appeared instead to be focused in creating a kind of cartoonish notion of what a billionaire might be in a very poorly drawn James Bond or Marvel comic movie. And in so doing, I came to start to believe that I was not really talking to somebody who was a hedge fund manager or a financier, but that I was instead talking to a very intelligent and extremely charismatic man. My recollection was that he was magnetically handsome, perhaps a little off in certain ways. Certainly he's been compared to Ralph Lauren, which was my thought. But he was prematurely gray, if I recall the image, and he had a kind of charisma that could probably be quantified in an era of facial recognition. There was something very, very unusual and compelling about him, despite the fact that he was more than a little bit lubricious. The meeting ended abruptly at some point, and I walked out. I remember feeling that there are very few times in your life when you feel the hair on the back of your neck rise up. I don't know whether that's literally what happened, but it was certainly the sense that I had met something unholy. And I remember calling my wife, and I remember talking to her, and I've used the word construct ever since. The relationship between consenting adults is, quite frankly, not something I want to sort out. The relationship between the sexuality of adults and minors And particularly, you know, there's the 17-18 issue. Mm-hmm. That's very different than 12-13. We're talking about really sick depravity with respect to what it appears that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in at some level. I believe this story is super complicated, in part because I think one thing Jeffrey Epstein was doing was providing money, encouragement, and support to scientists. Another thing he was doing, I believe, was giving tax advice to very rich people. I believe another thing he was doing was hooking very wealthy people up with young adult females. Another thing he was doing, I think, was doing stuff with children that will curl your toes. And at the moment, nobody can pull apart or deconflate anything because the woke thing comes over it and says, you know, I think it's disgusting that, you know, a 43-year-old billionaire would be partying with a 23-year-old. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to adjudicate that. I'm worried about 12 and 14-year-olds that we're not talking about. Yeah. I don't think MIT was deep into pedophilia. My guess is that did not happen. I don't think that the scientists were the targets of the really sick, depraved stuff. It's my guess. My guess is that what you're looking at was a government construct. And it may have been our government. It may have been a joint government project. It may have been somebody else's government. I don't know.
The shallow conversations of woke identity politics that you're referring to seems to be removing everyone's ability. No, everyone's willingness.
One of the things.
To talk about, like, what the hell is this person and how is he allowed? Most importantly, how do we prevent it in the future? And from the individual perspective, the question for me, what is the heroic action to take? We're not talking about virtue signaling action.
You wouldn't know what to do. You would not know what you're up against, Lex. You're not hearing me. The problem here is, what was Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, that question might be the heroic action to take.
That's all I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to get my first question. You have to map the silence with Jeffrey Epstein. What you're describing is a map of the silence at MIT.
Yeah.
Well, is there a map of the silence in Washington State around Jeffrey Epstein? The Bay Area, New York City? The amount of silence around Jeffrey Epstein should be telling you everything. The number of dogs that don't bark is like nothing we've ever seen.
And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal.
Wow. No, that's all I can really say. It's just wow. Anyway, if you like the video, hit them like buttons, hit the dislike buttons, hit the subscribe buttons, the share button, the other button, that button, this button, that button. Pick a button, push it. Thank you so much for hanging out. Take care, folks. See you soon. Peace.